You're listening to Head Voice, bringing you inside the minds of the best in contemporary a cappella. I'm Evan, and this week we are truly joined by one of the best. Mr. Rob Dietz is on the show. He's a prolific producer, performer, and arranger from the Los Angeles area. He's worked on everything from the Sing-Off to Glee to working with young groups like Vocalight and Legacy and OneVoice and Forte to professional groups like PTX, Street Corner Symphony, The Exchange, Traces, just to name a few. And he's also one of the founders of Cappella Academy. It was a real pleasure to talk to him. Thank you to everybody who sent in questions. We got in as many as we could. Couldn't get to all of them, but rest assured, Rob will be back for another episode someday soon, so look out for that. This episode is on the longer side, so I've timestamped all the different questions that we asked in the show notes so you can scroll through to whatever interests you the most. And without any further ado, I hope you enjoy this week's episode of Head Voice.
Cool. Thank you so much, Rob, for joining us on Head Voice. We're stoked to have you on.
My pleasure.
So we just kind of want to turn it over to you. If you could just kind of give us a little introduction and start with where you're from and what sort of musical influences you had growing up.
Sure. So hi, my name is Rob Dietz. I am originally from Ithaca, New York, in upstate New York, middle of nowhere, where it's very, very hot in the summer and very, very cold in the winter. And these days I live in Los Angeles, California, where it's basically the same temperature year round. So it's definitely a temperature upgrade. And my a cappella background. So I started a group in high school called Ascending Height. Which was my very first quintet that I directed all through high school. In college, I was the director of Ithaca Cappella, and I competed twice in the ICCA finals with that group. Since then, I graduated and I went to Australia, actually for a little while, where I studied at the Australian Institute of Music for a semester. And during that semester, I wound up getting the job working for the Sing-Off, and I said, all right, well, I like a cappella just a little bit more than Australia, only a little bit. And I decided to come back to the States for that, and that was in Los Angeles, and I've been here ever since. So out here, I direct a group called Legacy, which just competed at the Open Finals, and I do all kinds of freelance arranging and composing and singing, and I sing with Snowfall out here in the winter, and occasionally I still sing with the Funks, which is my long-distance professional group, and then every once in a while I sing locally with Level, which is my local professional group. So, a lot of a cappella all the time. And what else can I tell you?
Well, actually, I think that begs the question. Tucker Helms, one of our listeners, asked why a cappella in the first place, because you're obviously all in on a cappella. So, what started that for you?
I think, my first exposure to a cappella was probably like many people. I walked into my middle school choir teacher's room and he was playing an a cappella CD and I went, what is this? I love this. This is so cool. And I think early on I was kind of drawn to it because I've always been really drawn to the creativity aspect of it. That's always been my big thing, where I just think that it's so cool that a voice can sound like a voice can sound like a guitar, a voice can sound like a trumpet. There's so many different things that a voice can do. And within all that, it's all so honest. There's nothing between you and your audience, and it's just that all about that honest communication. So I think creativity is really at the heart of all of it, where it's just like, it seems to me like this, and still seems to me that even though we've kind of done a lot more with a cappella now, even since I've been involved with it, but this kind of open frontier of all these possibilities of what you can do with a voice. And even though we've done so much, I think that there's still so much left to go. So I'm so excited about that, even today and in the future, about like what can we figure out how to make a voice do next,
Yeah, totally. And I feel like what you're kind of saying earlier, just about like how the voice is like a very personal thing, makes a cappella music, specifically in the live realm, a very personal experience. So when you're at live settings or live shows, what exactly do you want to experience? What do you want most out of the performance?
Yeah, at a live show, I mean, what I'm looking for the most is just to make it, to have an emotional connection be made from performer to audience, right? That's my big thing, and it's really interesting because I was thinking about that all through the Open. I've been thinking about that a lot preparing for the Open, and thinking about what makes a great performance. And I think at the end of the day, it's really interesting because it's like emotional connection can be so subjective. It's just about what connects with a single person on a single moment on a single day,
Yeah.
And I think, for me, it's just that X factor. It's almost hard to describe, but it's just that moment where you're watching it and all of a sudden you just get that rush of whatever the feeling is. And I think we all kind of know that moment because we've all experienced that at some point or another. But, sometimes, and it's different. I find it's different for me in every performance exactly what makes that connection. Sometimes it's a lyric that just gets delivered so perfectly, or some high note that just like has this beautiful tone, or just the energy in the audience that like feeds into the energy of the performers. It really changes every time. But I think at the heart of all of it, the most common thread I think just seems to be emotional honesty and kind of getting like the trappings out of the way. I really like it when a group when I'm not really aware of the technical aspects that go into the performance. When that all kind of falls away and all you're left with is just the song and the message and the moment, and you're not really worrying about the tuning. You're not really worried about how does it all line up, but it just kind of makes you feel something, Right. It's sort of like, it's sort of very simple and very complicated all at the same time.
Yeah. I feel like that's a super interesting thing, because I think obviously most a cappella shows started as you sing in whatever room is available to you with no mics, and that used to be like the standard thing.
Yeah.
But I think you're seeing that we're slowly moving towards individual mics and like more professional sound for more and more shows, from scholastic to professional. And so making sure like there's now more technical things to be worrying about when you have a show going.
Sure.
So how do you like navigate that? And if whoever your engineer is, whether it's your college's sound person or a professional person, and if the sound's not quite where you want it to be, and if the stage isn't quite where you want it to be, how do you encourage singers or groups that you work with to be still focusing on making that emotional connection?
Sure. One thing that I started working a lot with Legacy this past year, and I'm going to do it even more this year, is this idea of practicing in the headspace of the performance, which I think is much easier said than done, but it's so important because I think at the end of the day, you can't really worry as a performer about all those technical things that are happening at once, because you have control over some or none of them, right? And it's a matter of maybe the sound's going to be perfect, maybe it's not, maybe the lighting's going to be perfect, maybe it's not. But at the end of the day, I think if you watch a group, you can always tell a truly professional group from an amateur group by whether they are still staying in the performance and communicating despite whatever may be going on around them technically, right? It's a subtle difference, but again, it comes back to like what you can feel. When a group really stays in the performance, even if things are not technically perfect, whether in their own singing or in the venue, I think you can just kind of tell the difference. And so I've been really encouraging Legacy, and I encourage all groups, if you make a mistake, don't go, oh, sorry, I made a mistake. It's like practice the way that you're going to perform and get yourself in the headspace as you're practicing of what the performance is going to feel like. Not just emotionally, but also just like professionally, in terms of don't stop, don't change your performance affect because you made a mistake, but really stay in it. And I think if you prepare that way, then when things don't go perfectly, you're just used to not betraying any problems. And when you don't show, when you don't show any problems in your performance, people don't necessarily pick up on it as much, right? People hear with their eyes as much as their ears often. If you look like you know what you're doing and you stay in it, you can trick a lot of people even if things are not perfect technically.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like that's a really interesting concept, and I'm curious to see what happens with Legacy when you start trying that. But also, how do you see yourself getting people into that mindset? Because it's one thing saying you can be in a performance mindset, but actually getting there, I imagine, is pretty difficult. So even if it's like physical factors or mental factors, how would you see that?
Yeah. Interestingly, I think a lot of it is kind of overcoming this cultural thing that we're all kind of going through now of, nobody, because everybody is connected now, because everything's on YouTube and, everybody is so out there now, there's this sort of culture of almost like aggressive humbleness that has kind of come into things. And this sense of like, oh, no, you're so much better than me, or no, I'm not, I'm not good. What are you talking about? I'm not good. Like, and just sort of protecting yourself from being, protecting yourself from people thinking that you're egotistical or, full of yourself by being so much the other direction. And I think some of this is really overcoming that, because in a rehearsal setting, especially young people, but everybody does it. When you make a mistake, you want to be like, oh, sorry guys, like that was me. Like, I won't do it again. I'm so sorry. And kind of drawing attention to that as a way of making a connection or leveling the playing field. But it actually runs counter to what you need to do to prepare for a good performance, right? Because you would never do that in a performance setting. So I think some of the challenge is just overcoming that sense of, I'm not good enough, or I need to take a step back, or, I need to, not be in a proud headspace might be the best way to describe it, right? Being in a humble headspace, and figuring out how can you be in a humble headspace while still being confident in your performance and not betraying any sense of, oh, I did this wrong, right? It's an interesting line to walk. It's kind of a fine line, but I think that that's really so important in making that preparation, is being in a headspace to be confident without being egotistical, right?
Yeah.
Being,
totally.
confident in your contribution without being self-deprecating in order to counterbalance any potential perception of egotisticalness on your part.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we were both at the Open. Legacy was at the Open, and I think something that I noticed there especially, but even in the Open semifinals and stuff, I think that there's like kind of a notable performance difference between pro groups and a lot of scholastic groups, in that, like at the Open, I think most, if not all groups said where they were from in their competition set, talked about, the meaning of a song at some point or something like that. I was just wondering like where you stand on that for, groups of all kinds of, prefacing a song with something, or directly talking to an audience. And
like I mean, I'm personally very pro that. I find it really artificial when groups don't do that in competition. I think that that's something that really, and I understand, sometimes you don't have time, and sometimes it doesn't feel right in the competition set or whatever it is. But I think, when you're a performer, there is space between songs, obviously, and usually that gets filled with some kind of talking that makes a more personal connection with the audience. So I think it's valuable because it gives the audience some context as to who you are. I think it gives the audience, and this is something that people forget, but it gives the audience a chance to digest what's going on, right? If you just go song to song or moment to moment, then you deprive the audience of the chance to really digest the things that are happening. So I think that, talking is a good palate cleanser too. It's a good way to let the audience reset, get ready for the next moment. And I think it's important. Some groups don't do it. I think that there are situations where it doesn't work if you have a seamless set or you've got, a really strict time limit. But generally speaking, I think it's important to have some moment where you connect in a non-musical way with your audience, whatever that may be.
Yeah. Like it kind of reminds me of what you're saying of, I read in one of Deke's arranging books a long time ago. I think one of the biggest things that I took away from it was this idea that kind of listening to a cappella can be a little bit tiring. So if you're just bombarding people with a cappella like all the time because there's so much information to take in, I think that really like speaks to like the importance of talking or resetting between songs.
Because I'm no neurologist or anything, but I've heard a lot of theories about the part of your brain that gets activated when you hear a cappella music is very, it's the same as when someone's talking to you, right? It's a lot. It's the same. Like it engages the part of your brain that someone is having like a personal talking connection with you. And I think that just as with anything, if you have a conversation with somebody for 2 hours, like it can get really exhausting. You know what I mean? Like you gotta mix it up a little bit. So it's it's important from a biological standpoint as much as a musical standpoint.
Right.
Yeah. And kind of on that thread, so I think the Open is just on my mind just because it just happened.
Yeah, totally.
But,
let's talk about the Open.
Yeah. And so obviously Legacy was there, and I'm sure, and you did in fact retweet the that New York Times article by by that one dude. And I was just curious kind of like your thoughts on that, because I think it'd been a while since I'd seen acapella reviewed from a non-acapella standpoint. And the guy had a lot of great things to say about legacy, but also kind of ripped into a lot of different acapella things for better or for worse. I think that there are some interesting points made. I just wonder if you have any responses.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a lot of thoughts on this, and I think, I'll preface this by saying I think it's really difficult. I have to wear a couple different hats here, right? Because it's, I am a fan and I am somebody in the community who likes to talk about this stuff, but I also had a horse in the race. So it's, I don't want anything I say to come off as sour grapes or, I'm sad with the way things wound up, because I'm really not, and it was a really great experience. That being said, I think it is interesting to use this as an opportunity to, look critically at the community and what's going on out, with things, and, both positively and negatively. And I think, one of the conversations that I've had since the Open with a few people is this idea of insider judging versus outsider judging, right? So, you see... And full disclosure, my thoughts on this are still evolving, and they always will be evolving, because that's just, the nature of art and judging art, is that things are always changing, and, perspectives are always changing. But I do notice a trend where people from within, people who listen to a lot of a cappella music, myself included, tend to gravitate towards certain things, right? Whereas people who don't necessarily listen to a lot of a cappella have a different context for those things, right? So I think that was some of why you saw, the New York Times reviewer have a very different perspective on some of the things that happen, is that there's just certain things that, for one reason or another, we really like. We've seen it a lot, and, we like it when things are very lined up. We like it when things are very precise. We like it when we often like it when things are very practiced. We don't necessarily like things... And obviously, again, to be fair, every judge is different, obviously, and everybody has their different perspectives on it. But generally speaking, I think that we, as a community, prize accuracy over rawness. And I think that people outside the community don't necessarily hear that the same way. I think that, people who just love music aren't necessarily as attuned, no pun intended, to whether something was like a few cents flat or a few cents sharp. It's just, they focus more on the, how the overall performance made them feel, and just what the aesthetics of things were, and and even in that you get some variety, but I think people listen with a different context. So Lord knows, there's all kinds of stuff, I'm sure, that goes into, how Varsity Vocals gets the judges, how they train the judges. I know there have been many, many conversations over the years, and I think that Amanda and the team do a fantastic job, given how difficult this is and how much goes into this. So, please know, if any of those people are listening, that I say all of this with full respect for what you do, and knowing that this is hard, and, and knowing that, take it with a grain of salt, because it's just my thoughts, and my thoughts may even change. But, I would be interested, especially at the finals level, to see what would happen if more people were involved in the judging panel who were not from the a cappella community, who were like, if that New York Times reviewer had been on the panel, what would the result be? And it might have been exactly the same. It might have been a little different, but I do think that there is a bit of a trend now of seeing the same kinds of things tried over and over again, because they work in that context. Some of that might be the rubric, some of that might be the judges, some of it might just be circumstantial, whatever it is. But I would be curious what might happen if somebody who had not seen those things a million times, but who was still a really qualified musician reviewer, were to be part of that judging process, and whether that might inject a little bit more of an outsider voice into the community and into, what we prize and what we try to do. And that might ultimately be good for us. It might be good to start, now that a cappella has expanded, to get to hear from more of those voices. I thought he had a lot of really good things to say. I didn't agree with all of it. I thought he was a little harsh to some people, but I thought there was a lot of truth to a lot of that. And not just because he was nice to me, like even if he had been mean to me, I still would have thought that there was a lot of really important stuff in that article. So,
yeah, and as you're saying this, a bigger kind of concept just came to mind about just like non-acapella versus acapella audiences and how they react to certain things. And I do think I do think a lot of the time in live settings, venues affect how people experience a certain performance or how they react to it. So do you have like certain thoughts on that in regard to like if maybe a certain song or a certain group might do better in a different setting versus a big stage like Carnegie Hall?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are certain things that are a little bit universal. I think like the emotional connection, like that stuff kind of plays very similarly in any venue. But I don't know. I mean, I think certainly Carnegie Hall in particular, because I was fortunate enough I opened the show also. Like I got to perform in the pickup group that opened the show, which was fantastic. But it was also really interesting for me to be on that stage in that context and see like, oh wow, there's like this crazy delay and like, there's all these things to consider. And I do think that bigger environments like that favor groups that have had more experience in bigger environments like that.
Right.
I think that that's just a learning curve. It's similarly to how, Pentatonics is out there playing arenas, right? If you stuck any old group in an arena setting, the monitoring situation is just so different, and it's such a different environment that I think, you would have to have a lot of experience and training to be as successful as you could be in that environment without having practiced it before. So, and I had that discussion with my group actually afterwards, and I was like, guys, the only way you can do that is to do it, get out there and play those venues. So I said 1 Carnegie Hall performance down, X number to go, hopefully. It's like, you hope you get to have that experience multiple times so you can, do that when you're back in that same kind of venue. But it's really tough to prepare for that without being able to be in that environment.
Yeah. So kind of just more like along the lines of the technical side, we had an audience question from Justin Critchfield, and he was asking...
Justin.
Hi, Justin.
Hi, Justin.
When seeing a live performance, a cappella or not, what part of the show is most important to you in terms of like the technical aspects? So like choreography, tuning, lighting, production, sound, audio, whatnot.
Yeah. Or even to add on to that, like what is overlooked sometimes, maybe.
Sure. I really like great soloists, and that doesn't just mean people that sing really well. It means people that sing really appropriately and sing really, with a lot of awareness of what they're singing. It's really hard to describe this, but I do think that we have kind of an epidemic in the community of people who are really good technical singers who don't sing stylistically very well, if that makes sense.
That's for that.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
And it's often like, you can break it down and you can say, oh, you put too much emphasis on this consonant, or your tone was wrong for this thing, and you can get very technical about it. But at the end of the day, again, it's just like how it feels, And so I've seen so many people who are singing technically very well, but you're just sort of like that just seems very like, and I don't really like this term because I think it's, it's a little bit dismissive, but it is accurate. Like it's a little karaoke, you know what I mean? It's a little like, it's not, it doesn't capture the essence of the song, and it doesn't capture the essence of the style, and it just doesn't feel honest. It feels like somebody, trying too hard to do a certain thing, whatever that thing is. So, so that's something that I really look for in shows is, whether the soloists feel really honest and appropriate, and whether, they're singing in the style well, and, whether it just feels like, I don't know, just like good music and not just like good a cappella, like there's a difference between good music and good a cappella. That you can do quote unquote do a cappella technically very well without necessarily making very good music. So I think that's something I look for, is just really great music and not just the great, technical delivery.
That reminds me of something you were saying earlier about when we were talking about the open, about kind of, groups trying the same things because they're tried and true. And I think obviously with Legacy and a lot of projects that you're involved in, you're trying to push groups to try to do something new, whether it's, arranging for OneVoice or whatever it may be. And in your tweet saying, I want to see this group, something new. I just think it's interesting when you look at, the pro groups that are the most successful now, they kind of, by and large, have their own niche that they fill. But like, if you pitch that group right now, maybe nobody would be like super into it, but they kind of just like did their thing and it worked. Like,
Sure.
you know, like a home free or like a voice play or something. Like maybe you're like country acapella. Like, why would you do that? You should do something more moody or brooding. But like they did it and they committed to it and it worked, you know? So
Sure.
I guess like, how do you like for groups that are trying to take the next step or new groups starting out, how do you try to make something that's true to what you are if it maybe like doesn't capture like the spirit of the moment per se stylistically? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, by spirit of the moment, do you mean sort of like what's popular within acapella?
What's trending? Yeah.
Sure. Well, the thing is, I mean, I sort of feel like we're actually trending away from the moody thing anyway, because it's been kind of done, and you know, it's definitely still around, but it is not necessarily as prevalent as it was even 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, I would say. I mean, the thing is, you gotta make the music that's honest for you, right? It's like not anybody could just up and do a country group. Not anybody could just up and make a hip hop group. Like you got to have the right lineup. And I think that's something that's really kind of overlooked sometimes. Is that I'm not saying, by the way, when I say any of this stuff on Twitter, that any of this is easy. Like I'm not saying like, oh, I want the next great hip hop group. Like you go do it. Because like you need the right combination of people, and if there's just no substitute for that, and it's I think that you really see that. I think you really see that with these groups that are successful, Pentatonics, Home Free, a lot of these groups that do this stuff. It's not, they hit the style really well, but they also just like, it just feels right from a personnel standpoint. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel forced. It feels like, this is the music that these people are supposed to be making. And so when I see a lot of these new pro groups starting up, right, they're often very talented, they're often really good, but they all generally kind of look the same. You know what I mean? They all sort of like have the same, bass, beatboxer, powerful upper voices. It's often in some kind of like middle of the road hip hop, R&B style kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's like it's generally kind of in the same vein. And yeah, I think there's definitely a market, and I think it would be great for more groups to come together who really say like, what is it that we're doing that could be so different than what's being done on the collegiate scene. And by the way, I think a lot of that happens because these people come out of their college groups and that's all they know. So they want to keep doing, they want to do the professional version of kind of what they knew in their college group, which is fine. But I don't know. I just think there is so much opportunity for people to come into the scene and be different and be more specific in their genre and capture new audiences and capture people, not just people who like a cappella, but people, who like reggae music, who like soul music, who like country music, who like folk music, whatever those things are. There are groups that have done that and have, varying degrees of success. But I think the more you lean into it and the more you have the personnel that it feels really honest with, the more successful it is.
And I think kind of along these lines, like at the end of the day, the arrangements that you're singing plays a huge role in the actual style that's perceived and how a group is perceived by their audience. So as an arranger who arranges for a lot of young groups, you're arranging for Legacy, Vocalight, Forte, OneVoice, a bunch of young groups. How do you kind of arrange to fit their style or fit their identity?
I mean, I think it depends on the group, but I think, one thing that I'm trying to do actually specifically with OneVoice this year is, I said to JD, I want to, more than I ever have before, I want to arrange for the specific people in your group. Like I really want to get down to, what do these individuals do really well? So he sent me a whole vocal guide this year of, I've got all his kids singing scales and solos, and I've really spent a lot of time studying that. So I really, I'm trying to drill down to what do they really do well, and what can I create that will highlight individual singers. Beyond that, and historically, I think the big thing is just understanding a group's context and understanding what a group's tradition is. and therefore, what they have historically done really well. And so, with Forte, for example, like when I started working with them, they had a really big sound. They were like 50 people in that group when I started working with them. It was it was a monster group, and they just, they had this big sound. It was a little bit raw. They had some really powerful solos. So we sort of started with that, and we leaned into that. And it's evolved from there a little bit, but that was sort of the core of like, what is this thing that they do really well. With Vocalight, I also have gotten to know those singers really well. And I think that, with them, they are kind of coming out of the pentatonics tradition and trying to access the pop crowd. So, I've done a little bit of like the pentatonics trickery with them, but I think also it's as their membership solidifies and as they continue to get more experience, their sound is starting to evolve. So, I look forward to hopefully doing some more work with them, because I think that we can really start to get even more specific about like what those particular people do well. And I think that there's a lot of cool stuff that they could do with their lineup of, yes, using that kind of pentatonics paradigm, but they have a different aesthetic. I mean, they've got a little bit more maybe rawness to them, a little bit more soulfulness. It's they have a different je ne sais quoi, as so to speak. So, and everybody has that. So I think as an arranger, it's just about identifying what that is, and even if you can't necessarily put your finger on it, being able to kind of access whatever the closest elements of that are to create something that a group will really be able to dig into.
Yeah. So I think obviously that's the ideal when you're arranging it for a group, that you want to know the voices as intimately as possible. But I assume that you're doing some arranging for groups with frequent membership turnover. So our friend Ricky wants to ask, like, how do you do that effectively when you know that the group's going to have new members in a year, and if you're not a member of the group or a director of the group?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that the key in those situations is just to color more in the lines. And I preach this on Twitter a lot. It's just like, whatever you think a tenor's range is, take a step off the top. You know what I mean? It's just like whatever you think a soprano can do, just shave a little bit off, the low end and the high. It's just, and I think when you don't know the group, that really serves you very well. I think especially for younger voices, with exceptions here and there, but people generally have a much more limited range, especially when they're on stage, nervous, moving, keeping all that stuff into account. I think it was Ed Boyer. I'm trying to remember who I heard say this, but somebody was talking about judging ICCA and do you have any advice? Like, what do you think? Oh no, he was editing. That's what it was. He was editing. He was editing for the pop show for Sing It On, and he was posting. He said, I'm almost positive, I think it was him. He said, make sure, don't have your basses hit the absolute lowest note they possibly can at the climactic moment. Because they're not going to hit it. You know what I mean? It's just like they're going to be moving, they're going to be, doing their thing, and don't, if it's the lowest note they can possibly hit in a rehearsal setting, they're never going to get it live. You know what I mean? It's just like, what you can do in rehearsal and what you can do live, you have to account for that, the nerves and the movement and the venue and all of the circumstantial stuff that limits you. So, so I really try to keep that stuff into account when I'm doing this, and I don't if I'm writing at the extremes of anybody's range, first of all, I try not to do that. But second of all, if I have to do that, I try to really set it up well and think about, how are they going to get there the most easily, idiomatically in the voice? How are they going to, what is this going to look like on stage? How can I slip this in a way that, it won't necessarily conflict with the movement that they're invariably going to be doing, and stuff like that. So that's what I'm thinking about, is really just the very practical limitations of not just what can the voice do, but what can the voice do singing contemporary a cappella in this kind of a setting, because it really is so different. It's not a rehearsal setting, it's a performance setting.
Right. And
so thanks Ed.
Kind of on the flip side of that, though, on the opposite end of the technical spectrum, there's obviously a lot of creativity that goes into arranging. So Isaiah Carter actually had one question. He wanted to know, what are your inspirations for arranging? Because I'm sure there are many.
Yeah. My inspirations for arranging, we talked about this a little bit in the open interview that we did, but Aurora is a huge thing for me. I love, their approach to vocals, because Aurora really nails it in terms of, what voices do well, and just that like the honesty of singing. There's not a lot of like the bells and whistles are like just the right amount. It's not. They don't try to make their voices do anything that their voices can't do well. It's just very. It's just so beautiful and so idiomatic and. And just works so well for their voices and what they do. They've been a huge inspiration. Deke was a huge guide for me as I was learning how to do this. I think, Deke, I got a lot of interesting information and experience with Deke working on the sing-off in terms of, what works in like a high pressure setting and what works with like an on-camera setting and a little bit about, audience expectation from him too. I think that he's really in touch with like, songs that are, classic songs and like how people are going to perceive that in the context of their own background. And
totally,
I think he's really good at like identifying what from like original songs really sticks with people. And incorporating that stuff. And he's another, really person who really trumpets like the honesty factor, which I really believe in. So he was a really great mentor to me in that way. Nobody knows him anymore, which is a huge shame. Samrat Chakrabarti, Hyena Sound back in the day. You guys ever heard of him?
No.
Yeah, nobody knows him anymore. It's such a shame.
Tell us more.
Yeah. He was one of the most important, hands down, one of the most important arrangers of the early 2000s. He did all the Hyena Sound stuff around like 110 and Cape Standard Time and Route 6, like that kind of era. Never wrote anything down. It was all by ear. But I learned so much from him. I really can measure my arranging. I did a workshop with him, Ed Boyer, and John Clark in Boston when I was 16. And there's my arranging before that, and there's my arranging after that, and there's a clear line of how I was thinking about texture. He was a guy who was really thinking about texture in an unconventional but very it just really kind of worked way. He used really interesting syllables. He pulled a lot of like syllables from like from Indian music was a really interesting thing that he did a lot. Other languages, he would pull stuff in. He taught me a lot of great stuff about using common tones and using color tones to create, that what was sort of the proto like Eric Whittaker-y sound before it was the Whittaker, that like dense harmonic thing. I learned a lot about how to do that from him. And his stuff was just like so rhythmically interesting. And the language of it was so cool. So he's a guy, people sleep on him a lot now because he's, as far as I know, he's a pretty successful actor now, I think. But he's somebody, Tom Anderson is somebody else who I have a lot of respect for. He's another person who'll tell you. Samrat was huge for him too. But yeah, Samrat Chakrabarti, look him up. He's amazing.
Yeah. We will definitely look him up.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll link him in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, it's really something else. So let's see, other people. Yeah, as I think as far as like the non-acapella stuff goes, there's stuff that I find really interesting, but I'm not really sure I would say I'm inspired by it necessarily. I think I think listening to like instrumental arranging, like instrumental jazz stuff, Spyro Gyra, I think is really interesting. Like stuff where it's there's no vocal, so it's all about the arranging and the creation of sound with stacking the different timbres of different instruments. I don't know if I'm necessarily inspired by that, but I think that listening to that stuff can tell you a lot about how music is constructed, which totally carries over into vocal music. I've gotten a ton out of working with Ben Bram. Arranging with him has been a really great experience for me. He and I have worked really well together in some of the stuff that we did for Level, and he's somebody who really
bring Level back.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Everyone's so busy. I wish it's everybody's the downside of working with a group of really talented people is it's hard to get them off of whatever else they're doing. Touring with Postmodern Jukebox and doing their own tours and being super successful in all their fields. It's hard to get them together, but. Yeah, Ben is great. Ben is great at, taking away the like. He was very good at getting me out of my acapella brain. He's very good at like, what is good music? Like, stop doing this. Like, don't do this thing that you think is all vocally a cappella cool and cute and smart, and like just what is the good music, like get down to that. So, working with him has been really good in helping me develop that, like, okay, I don't need to like have all these bells and whistles and like weird a cappella-y things happening. It can just be, really good music.
Yeah. I was going to say actually about your arranging, whenever I hear your stuff, it all just feels so eminently singable, which I really like. It's like, it's meant for that person who's singing it to be singing it, but it's not like, it's something that feels natural, not like they have to be thinking about these notes on a staff or whatever.
Right.
So I was interested in, and another thing to me that pops out of your stuff is that there are rhythmic elements that match with like more paddy stuff, but in a really effective way. And I think an interesting dichotomy right now, at least in this classic sphere, is kind of you're either in Gen-Do land or you're just holding out whole notes for the whole song. And I was just wondering how you like kind of think about that and approach stuff, because like something as simple as like the in the intro to Stay is one of my favorite things of yours. Just like such a simple little motif, but it's so good and it works so well for the whole song. So just how do you like think about that?
It's funny that you mentioned that one actually, because that arrangement was not actually really, it was not inspired by Overboard, but if hearing it reminds me of the beginning of Get Back. Like I always think about that when I hear that arrangement. But yeah, I mean, I think from the rhythmic standpoint, I draw a lot of that from paying attention to how backup singers function rhythmically in a band, right?
Yeah.
And I think that I use that a lot. I think about my singers in an arrangement as a background trio or a background quartet, and I use that kind of stuff rhythmically. So whether it might be like an echo thing, or it might be something that kind of bounces around the lead or whatever it is, but it's got a lot to do with like the relationship with the lead and playing off of that in a way that adds some rhythmic interest. But because it's still sung vocally, it feels very organic to the voice. So I think that there's a lot of ways to do that. And then also, I think another one of my kind of tricks for rhythm is just like I try to get away from the percussive syllables that tend to be used in a cappella, and I just like get right down to what the voice part of it, right? So so I'm not doing like, I mean, sometimes I will, but I shy away from like da 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 da, and I'll just go what I mean? I'll take away like the sharp part of that, and I'll get to what is the voice actually doing there.
Yeah.
And I just try to make sure that it's something that's very singable.
And are there any arrangements in particular that you're especially proud of, or you think really like showcase your ideas and your creativity in the best way?
It's interesting that you ask it, because it's such a moving target. Like I'm always trying to evolve my arranging, and so the stuff that there have been some sort of historically for me that I'm like, I really loved that, but they don't necessarily represent what I love now. So I still am really proud of my arrangement of Sound of Silence for Ithaca Cappella that got nominated for a Cara in 2011, I think. That was something I really poured my heart and soul into, and I think was really successful. I'm really proud of that one. The experience of, I always talk about, it wasn't really my arrangement, but the experience of being involved in the arranging of All the Lights on the Sing-Off was a huge thing for me. Was really proud of the performance of that, and it taught me a lot about, was a big moment for me in thinking about the like dramatic arc of arranging and thinking about the stage performance of an arrangement while you're putting it on paper, so to speak, even though that particular arrangement was never written down. But other things, I don't know. I'm always, life support I'm really proud of. Make It Holy I'm really proud of, even though, and it's so funny because like while I was doing it, like Make It Holy really was a big hit, and while I was doing it I wasn't like, oh, I'm really knocking it out of the park. It's just like, it was one of those things where I was just like, I was proud of it. I really enjoyed it, but it came to life when the group took it. You know what I mean? That was one that, you know, on paper it's a good chart. Like I'm definitely proud of it, but it was OneVoice that really made that special, I think. And that happens a lot. That's, you know, and I think that's actually kind of the sign of a good arrangement is if it doesn't necessarily have to sparkle on the page. It's if the group, you know, takes it and brings it to life. That's what really makes something great. Because that means you did your job. You know, if it's great on paper or it's great when I demo it, but then the group itself doesn't sound very good on it, then, you know, it's not a real win in my book. It's, you know, it's you want the group to really take it and give it a life of its own. So that's another one that I'm proud of in that respect.
I was actually just wondering, like, you're clearly so busy all the time. And how do you, and to me, not to butter your bread, but the arrangements for any group that you work on turn out so consistently great. And like, how do you, as a professional now, how do you get out of the headspace of, I'm going to painstakingly shift this chord until it makes me feel.
How do I not go totally crazy? Yeah. Totally. It's two things that I've kind of come around to. One, I've spaced my deadlines out more because I really, it's important to me to, even if I don't necessarily do my best work on every single thing, I always try to, and I always try to give myself enough time to be able to do that. I do my deadlines out. I used to do, you know, an arrangement a day. I don't do that anymore because I didn't like being a factory. I didn't like, you know, cranking stuff out and, you know, just doing the same thing over and over again because it was fast. You know, even if it was still good, I just wasn't. It's not the arranger that I want to be. I don't want to be. I don't want to be the guy that just, you know, cranks out a bajillion arrangements and they're all good, but they're all kind of the same thing. So I wanted to really give myself time to be able to make each thing a little bit more unique. And, you know, sometimes I am able to do it and sometimes I'm less able to do it, but, you know, I always make the effort. And that comes into the second thing, which is just, you know, and I tell our young arrangers this, it's just like, look, by definition, you're only ever going to have your one best arrangement. Every arrangement is not going to be your best arrangement. It just doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? And and that doesn't mean each arrangement can't be great. It just means you have to give yourself permission to not get so hung up on making every single thing you do the best thing you've ever done. Because then you won't ever do anything, right? You just kind of get trapped in that space forever. So my goal, if I do one really unique thing per arrangement, that's always my goal. I always try to have something in the arrangement. And then I always say to myself, you know, if I was at a festival and a group performed this arrangement, would I be proud of it? That's always like, that's always my benchmark. It's just like, if I just was out somewhere randomly, had no idea they were going to perform the arrangement, never heard of the group, wasn't even necessarily for them, would I be proud of this arrangement? And if I say yes, then I'm like, okay, good, I'm doing my job. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
So when we asked audience questions, we got a fair amount of serious ones, but then also some funny ones. And I just wanted to ask this just because I'm curious. But Dio said, what are the most notes you've ever stuffed into a bell chord? If you even know that, I'd be impressed. But
well, Dio, however many it is, I'm going to put twice as many in the next OneVoice chart just for you because I know how much you love them. That's a good question.
You don't have to answer.
Well, I think it's not technically a bell chord, but I got, I think, 13 into the last OneVoice album, but it wasn't a bell chord. It was like, it was everybody splitting off in like a 3-note pattern, but there were like 12 different like endpoints to it. Or something like song? That. It was Enlightening. Whatever that was. So I know I could count, but it wasn't technically a bell chord, but that was the most belly I've ever been on purpose.
Well, I'm pretty sure that we could keep asking you questions for another like 3 hours, but we should probably start wrapping it up. And so
I like talking about acapella.
Well, we hope to have you back on at some point. But for now, what is the thing that you most want to see happening in acapella, and then what is next for you?
I most want to see a few things. I really want to see more of the genre stuff that we were talking about. I want to see groups really have more identity and really reach new audiences by creating music that's really targeted at people who like specific genres, not just people who like a cappella in general. I think that's really going to be huge. Along with that, it's like I said before, like I want people to get pickier about stylistic singing and really singing appropriately in different styles, so that it's not just, oh, I'm a good singer, I'm going to sing this thing, but what really makes a great solo in the genre that you're in. I think that's going to be a huge thing. And more, one of my, this dovetails into my thing, is I want to get more people singing younger. And I think that part of that is I'm trying to create more material for young singers who are coming through the choral programs, who are coming through, community stuff, the things like that. I want to give them more things to sing that aren't strictly classical, aren't pop, or pop arrangements done by a chorus, but really things that are for chorus, that are pop, but still feel very much like a choral thing. I think like Eric Whitacre stuff is kind of in that vein, but I think I'm looking for something that even leans a little bit more in the pop direction without being like a sing-off opener. I think that there's something, there is a zone between Eric Whitacre and sing-off opening number that I'm really interested in creating more of, that will get young people who are in chorus really excited about contemporary a cappella and introduce them to the techniques of contemporary a cappella without scaring their teachers, without their teachers being like, oh my God, I have no idea what this is or how to teach this. And I've created some of that stuff for Cappella Academy. Wade in the Water that we did 2 years ago, How Can I Keep From Singing that we did this year. So I'm really playing around with, how can we reach those kids more? Because I want to, the more we can hook them young, and the more we can get people interested in doing this, as they come up. And that's another huge goal at Cappella Academy, is to get those people interested. The more talent pool we're going to have to create, these college groups and pro groups and high school groups that really make that connection. We need more people. We need more great talent in the pool in order to have those great groups. So I think, more crossover and more reaching into those, the school music programs, choral programs, things like that. There's already a lot of that great outreach being done, but I want to do even more of that, and I think that there's a good opportunity for it. So that's kind of where I'm headed. And then just professionally, more directing for myself. I really love directing. I love working with Legacy. They're amazing. I love coaching groups all over the place. I love being able to come in and be that outside perspective, and it really combines a lot of things that I love doing, and that I think that I have a really unique skill set, having come from the choral world, having conducting training, but also having done contemporary stuff I've been doing it for, I really started doing it in earnest when I was 13 or 14, so I've been doing it for almost over 15 years. So being able to offer that and help people access what is so cool about this, but what is also so universal about the style. That's really exciting to me. So hopefully, getting to do more of that, and then always arranging and composing. Obviously, I love doing that stuff. So I'm always happy to keep pushing the boundaries there and keep working with new and talented groups. And it's a pretty awesome community to be part of. So very grateful to be doing this, and it's been great to talk to you guys. I'm so glad that I love sitting down and getting nerdy about this. So
we were so happy to have you on, and we could probably spend another entire episode just talking about Cappella Academy. So that we might just reach.
You know what? Let's get the other two founders. Let's do it with me, Avi, and Ben.
I'm down.
Okay. I mean,
let's do it soon too, actually, because we're trying to get auditions going. So let's do it, sometime this fall, and we can use that as advertising for auditions.
Cool.
Great.
So listeners, listen up. That's coming out soon. So just be on the lookout for that. Avi and Ben, this is the first time you're going to hear about this. So.
Come on, guys. We gotta do the show. Come on.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
And we hope that you will join us next week for a new episode of Head Voice.
Oh, yeah.